Welcome to the Mind Solution Podcast with Sarah. The Mind Solution Podcast is for leaders like you who are passionate about well-being because you understand that strong, resilient, and happy work is the key to your organization. The Mind Solution Podcast is here to help. So join us every week where we'll share with you powerful insights, strategies, and know to ensure that people and your organisation are truly thriving from the inside.
So welcome everybody. I am delighted to be joined today by Bonnie Clark, and Bonnie is the CEO of reMarkable, who's making waves in a wellbeing economy and helping organisations create a wellbeing economy alongside the government. So welcome, Bonnie.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's so lovely to be here. I'm just delighted myself. Thank you.
Well, you and I met, quite a long time ago now, Bonnie. It was about 8 years ago. In fact, you were one of the very first people that I met when I first moved up to Scotland, moved up to Edinburgh, and I've been watching your journey, and I know that your journey has changed. So I'd love you to just tell us a little bit more about your own background and what's brought you to the point that you're at now.
Oh, well, thank you for giving me that opportunity. So I think that my role, my purpose in life was defined for me when I was 4. I'm not going to give you the whole scenario of my life at 4, but I knew that I wanted to be around people. I wanted to help people, and I wanted to do things where giving people the chance to flourish. And I didn't really have the words for that when I was 4, but I was able to manifest those ingredients in my role and my career. And I have had the glorious opportunity of running businesses within headhunting firms, leadership management firms, really with the sort of the everything that is germane to the spirit of making work better for people, in a practical and in a holistic way as well. And right now, the business that we're in, reMarkable, and I feel that that's an aspiration for ourselves to live up to as a business, but also an aspiration for how we can help our clients become remarkable businesses and remarkable organizations. And I suppose the bottom line for us is to make work and life better, because one is intrinsically linked to the other, and we are the whole human. And so we approach all the work we do in a very holistic way, which for me really ticks lots of my boxes and helps me live purposefully. But I hope that we can help clients and businesses and individuals within those businesses live purposefully as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I love the fact that you had that insight when you were 4. I mean, clearly you're on the right career path with where you are now. But just picking up on what you said there about making work better, and what I'm curious to understand is, if I was in an organisation and I was to wave a magic wand and the next day when I came into work was better, what would let me know that? What's your criteria for what making work better actually looks like?
So some of the things are really simple, like a sense of being heard, my voice being taken into consideration, my perspective. And a lot of things around hierarchy in organizations quashes people's voices and doesn't give them a chance to feel that they're properly, fully engaging in the work that is being done. And I think that is a simple thing that you would feel better if your boss made your life better by actually being curious about your perspective. You have a different viewpoint to them and you have different information. And if they were curious about finding out about that, I think that would instinctively make you feel better. And following on from that, I think that you've done a previous podcast about diversity and inclusion, but one of the things that I think is so important to that whole agenda, but will absolutely make work better, is that sense of belonging. I'm in the right place. I belong here. I have people around me who respect me, who have a desire for me to live my best life and for me to flourish in the job that I'm doing, and give me the right tools. And I don't mean physical tools like a laptop, because they're basic needs within a business, but the tools to flourish, which are a listening ear, the right opportunities to have some training or development, or, as I said right at the beginning of this, someone who really is curious about who I am and what I'm contributing and what I see.
And what I hear in what you've just said, Bonnie, is there's kind of two things that jump out at me. There's the leadership and management style, as you said, that being curious and engaged about what your people have to say, and seeking out their contribution, seeking out their input. And the other part that I heard, which I guess would feed into that, is about the culture of the organisation.
Yeah, culture. I mean, we could have a whole podcast on just culture, because it is what keeps people in a job, in a role, engaged and positively contributing. And culture is also what makes people leave. And we are in in the UK, and I think that also in most of Western world, we're in a sort of a skills shortage. It's a definite talent issue coming through. At the moment in the UK, there's 1.9 people for every job that's advertised. And in the month of January, 1 million people changed jobs.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite phenomenal. And people are leaving businesses because they don't feel that sense of purpose, because the culture is not serving them, and because there are opportunities out there with other organizations where the culture does serve them. And we need to be mindful as business leaders, as as leaders in any organization, that we set the tone and tempo, and it's our responsibility to create an environment and create the culture where people want to stay.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because having worked in HR for 12 years, I mean, I've not worked in HR for over a decade, but that was always the case, even pre-pandemic. And it feels like the pandemic's just magnified that. And under very extreme circumstances, people have just made that decision. You know what? Enough. It was almost kind of like the biggest experiment of how do you take care of your people?
Yeah,
like the biggest employee survey that you could ever do, and what the results were. Did you find that?
I did, actually. It's a global social experiment that has really helped everybody find out what matters to them. And we would never have been had the opportunity, and despite the tragedy of the pandemic, this is an upside and an unintended positive consequence that we can all use to our advantage and to the working world's advantage. Research suggests that people are actually more productive, and they make a positive impact when they're working from home. So the old narrative of people at home working, is a dubious context, is totally wrong. And I also think that now we have the opportunity to reflect on actually what's important from a business perspective. And one of the things that I'm finding right now with our clients is that there is a real drive for understanding more about the people strategy, the business strategy, and then this whole ESG, the environmental and social governance strategy, what we like to call as the contributing to a wellbeing economy. And I think that this is the sort of the combination, a Venn diagram, the sweet spot of some really important tectonic plates that are just moving to create a world where we have to reevaluate the systems that we've based our businesses on for decades, for hundreds of years, and they're not serving us any longer. And we need to be the visionaries that grasp the difference and take things to the next level, up level our own understanding, and up level our business etiquette, the way that we operate, so that it serves our people, it serves our planet, and there is prosperity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you've said. It reminds me of being at, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza, but a big thought leader in the world of well-being. And he talked about how systems have to break down in order for them to be rebuilt. So if we think about kind of like the financial crash many, many years ago, you know, the consequences of it were quite significant, but equally, as you said, we were handing out money to people that couldn't afford mortgages. The system wasn't working. And sometimes it's a bit like the process of metamorphosis. You know, the caterpillar effectively has to eat its cells in order to emerge as a very different identity as the butterfly.
Yeah.
But picking up on what you said about a well-being economy, and I'd love you to just expand on that, Bonnie, and help people to understand, what does that actually look like? What does that mean?
So the wellbeing economy is an alternative vision for the economic system. It's one where the economy serves society and the environment, and it is a transition. We can't do that right now. It's not a turn on and off switch, but it's a way of us of looking about the economic structure in the world. Rather than depleting the world by extracting things, we want to be able to create a world where we can positively contribute things. And I think that this is the intrinsic part of a well-being economy is purpose. You know, what is the purpose of the business, society, how we can create a financial framework for prosperity without causing harm to our people and our planet.
Absolutely. And I wonder, because sometimes you hear the term money talks. And I loved what you said about creating that sense of purpose. It's like the Simon Sinek talk: start with why, start with the heart, because essentially we are emotional beings. We are driven by emotion. But where we've got really big organizations that maybe seem to be very influential because they are very profitable, they might have a really large market share. I'd love to know your thoughts about, how do we create this shift change to align with everything that you describe when we have got organizations and industries out there where money might still seem to talk, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think that there are many sort of big businesses that are afraid of this transfer of thinking because their whole structure, their foundations are really built on the principles of a traditional capitalist market. And you know that's really difficult to sort of unpick. But within those businesses, there are many dimensions of a wellbeing economy. And I started right at the beginning to talk about how the way that we can help businesses engage their people is redefining leadership, redefining the participation of people. And that's one of the dimensions of a wellbeing economy, having people feel a sense that their voice is important, because that way they can collaborate more. Organizations will achieve a more purposeful approach to their impact on their outputs. And so despite the fact that it is an economic shift, there are many elements within a wellbeing economy that big businesses can adopt and move into that way of thinking. I mean, so for example, product and service innovation. Let's design products and services that take people and planet into account rather than extract things from the planet that deplete the planet. And then we have to spend extra money reinventing new ideas to put things back into the planet so that we're not eroding the natural resources of the planet. So let's start with the end in mind. Let's create products that are reusable, recyclable and repairable, rather than just used and binned, one use only. Those are simple things that businesses are being forced to think about. And that, I think, is that comes to the also a very important point, which is about the power of an individual. You know, we as individuals have great power, and sometimes it maybe feels that we don't, but every time we make a purchase or make a choice about where we spend our money is an important vote that we are making for what is right within our perception of the good and right society that we're living in.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I would imagine, thinking back to what you were saying about recruitment and talent, that individuals where actually this matters. And I feel like we've become a lot more socially conscious over the last decade, that people are potentially going to make decisions that go beyond just pure salary. I always find it interesting when I see on LinkedIn, you know, it's almost like salary is the first thing that they advertise, but it might not. You know, if you have an organization that meets your values, that really cares, what are we really going to make that decision on? And I mean, you've worked in headhunting, you've worked in recruitment. What are your thoughts about that, Bonnie?
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt that I over the years, historically, and even now when we're working with clients on culture, people are surprising themselves by leaving and then wanting to come back to an organization that they feel that they make a positive contribution to the purpose, though the purpose is aligned with them. And so it's beyond financial gain. And there's been lots and lots of research about, you know, the happiness quotient and salary. And there is that sweet spot between sort of 28 to 30,000, and it might be a little bit more depending on, you know, how the general economy is going at the moment. We all know that prices are rising, but after that point, salary becomes less important to people, and there is no direct correlation between an increased salary and increased happiness. So your happiness quotient really is, you know, distinct. You know, the peak is around a certain salary point, and so people then, you know, leave and think, actually, the grass isn't greener on the other side, and actually what's important to me is not an extra, you know, £2,000, £5,000, but what is really important to me is feeling like I'm making a positive contribution to a purposeful organization, that are not extracting from the planet, that are contributing to the planet, and they are able to, you know, there is an alignment of values. And so, you know, businesses are having to really quickly wake up to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also strikes me, based on what you said, it's also that misunderstanding of where does happiness come from. You know, there's that real misunderstanding, the outside in perspective, which the old dogma of I'll be happy when I earn this amount of money. I'll be happy when, you know, I've got the Mercedes, I've got the promotion, I've got this, I've got that. And yet we've known for a really long time, centuries, that happiness is within us. Everything's with us. It's completely 100% internally generated. And I loved what you said about, you know, if you're working for an organization that really lives its values, and it reminds me of the human givens, you know, what if our needs are being met in the right way, then we're going to flourish. And we're going to choose, even if it's on an unconscious level, but we're going to choose to feel happier. In fact, pulling on what you said about how an organization takes care of its people, I was talking to one of our clients only a couple of weeks ago, ISN Software. They're a huge software recruitment company in the US, and they've invested in our Wellbeing portal for employees for a number of years. And they said it's a brilliant recruitment tool. I mean, it's great for lots of other reasons, but, you know, people that are coming to interview are actually really valuing, oh, you've got something, you have something in place. So that translates in their mind to you care about your people. Yeah. And this isn't just some tick box exercise.
Yeah, I think that the point you just made there, it can't be a tick box exercise, because people can see through that so quickly. It becomes meaningless, and actually it literally goes the other direction and turns people off and makes people want to leave, because there's a real sense of dubiety about, you know, every other policy or value that they purport. If they're not living them, then they just really fail miserably, and are more damaging than anything, because you just don't live up to them.
Yes. And it's kind of the word that comes to my mind listening to that is authenticity. I think people have just reached a point, as you say, the pandemic gave a lot of people time to reflect on what mattered to them, what was important to them. And that authenticity and leadership, for me, certainly go hand in hand. Mm. And I'd love to know from your experience and the clients that you've worked with, Bonnie, where you are seeing organisations that are creating this holistic wellbeing economy. Mm. What's the return on investment that you're seeing for those organisations?
Well, I think retention is one of them, and that it can't be swept under the carpet. The cost of recruitment, the cost of training, the cost, there is, you know, real, you know, pounds and pence value that is connected to having to hire new people all the time, and the time that it takes, and the unintended time consequences for other people. So the real major benefit of living as an authentic, honest leader with integrity, and those words are like spoken about so often, but sometimes they need to be lived. So that is a financial obvious connection. The other very simple things are productivity. Productivity is higher. There's many pieces of research about productivity rates and how people feel connected to an organization when they're purposeful and value led. You know, you are much more likely as an individual to want to put in that extra effort because you believe in what you're doing. And that's, you know, that goes in across any organization, and it's just that link. And you talked about that intrinsic motivator. Well, there's an intrinsic motivation that is totally connected with that, the cognitive dissonance that you get when you feel connected. You want to do more. You are aligned. You are deeply aligned, and you won't be shaken. And in a really good way. I'm using cognitive dissonance in a good sense in this way, because you're connected.
And actually, what strikes me is, you know, in terms of going the extra mile, in my mind, doing more doesn't actually have to mean that you're sat at your desk at 8 o'clock at night when you should be putting your kids to bed, for example. Thinking about all of the work. I mean, I've probably held about 10,000 one-to-one sessions into the minds of people. And what strikes me is that when people are really engaged, when their heart is engaged with something, that what naturally happens, especially if they're working in a holistic environment and they understand well-being, they've got an organisation that supports their well-being, so they know how best to take care of themselves as well, that term, they're working smarter and not harder. You know, their energy levels are higher. They're more focused. They've got more of a sense of clarity. They're making better decisions. So going that extra mile and putting in more doesn't have to equate to potentially burning themselves out.
100%.
They're just more agile. They're more like an athlete. Whereas when they're disengaged, they're more, you know, especially if they're disengaged and living in that stress response, they've lost access to the executive functions of the brain.
100%.
All of that, which pulls productivity down in a way that some business leaders may not, in fact, I don't think have necessarily made that link yet.
No, 100%. 100%. creativity and innovation are totally directly linked with feeling that you're working in a purposeful environment. And simple things like just being mentally and cognitively engaged and making better, swifter decisions, because you if you are working in this sort of one of the elements of participatory leadership, and you are given the authority to make decisions, you're able to scan and be curious and make connections much swifter because you've been given the authority to do so. And that is a real buzz when it comes to feeling your contribution. That's not about working an extra 2 hours. That's actually using your mental acuity, your cognitive and intellectual capacity to its 100% best use.
Absolutely. It reminds me, actually, one of my very first ever jobs in HR. I used to work with, well, they're now recognised as e-bookers, but back then they were flight bookers. And I had a wonderful HR director, a lady called Dawn Murphy. She was incredibly empowering. And I mean, I was kind of so green. I'd literally just finished my degree in HR and my CIPD, but the amount that she used to empower me with, I did absolutely go the extra mile. I mean, my energy levels and my drive were incredible. I climbed the HR career ladder very quickly, and I do absolutely attribute it to exactly what you've just said. Mm-hmm. Picking up on what you said at the beginning though, Bonnie, when you talked about inclusion and that sense of belonging, as organisations are operating in this new hybrid world where people might only be coming into the office potentially 1 or 2 days a week, we've maybe lost some of the, what's the best way of describing it? What we might term as the water cooler chats, that social interaction, that, let's go out after work, and, those connections that were built in quite social environments that created that sense of inclusion, that sense of belonging. I mean, some of the best friends that I have are ones that I met in HR donkey's years ago. How do you see this playing out? How can organisations do more to create that sense of belonging and inclusion in this new working world?
So the social glue for me is about shared experiences. And they can be physical and they can also be virtual. But shared experiences are, for me, what builds relationships. And so if there is any opportunity to collaborate in any way on any project, create distinct and specific opportunities to do that. It doesn't have to be, that everybody's physically in the same place, because we've done virtual and physical connected together. And it's surprising how well that can work. But when people collaborate and work together, there's a sort of a special sort of the fairy dust that really gets sprinkled on a project. Now, what we have discovered in our research is that people are now coming with a different set of expectations about their own lives as well. And so, for example, in our business, we've hired people that would never normally have applied for a job in a particular location because it was too far away from them. Uh-huh. However, they're totally happy to come for shared projects, for a piece of work, maybe twice a month, even maybe once a week. And so I think that there should be that rather than very, very specific, you are coming in for this time and this particular, just for the sake of being in the office. Let's create opportunities for people to collaborate and be together. And for me, that seems to be the best combination, shared experiences. And that could be social. And so we did a very funny thing together. And we did a painting workshop online together as a whole group. And it was so fun and entertaining. People are talking about it, months and months later. We've made pizza. We've done pizza making. We had a chef who came online and talked us through how to make pizza. And again, that was something that was virtual, but we still talk about it because we laughed so much. And then just last week, I got together with a colleague, and we had a specific task in hand. We were working on a particular project, and we had a number of hours that we were together, and we just workshopped it, and it was so much fun. So I think that there's no one answer. I think there's a lot to do with asking your team as well, and not being afraid of the answers that they're going to give you, and also to hold your own views lightly and not be intransigent once you've made a decision, but be a decisive leader with all the information that you've gathered, but don't hold your views too heavy in your hands, and really allow yourself to be curious about other people's views.
It's interesting, isn't it, when I think about organizations are all, as a consumer or as a client, we're always being asked for our feedback. It's like, even doing your Waitrose or Sainsbury's shop, tell us our feedback. How did we do? So we've got so many organizations that are always seeking that information from their customers, but their internal customers. You might have, as you say, that you might have the sort of one annual employee survey, but even then, are we really asking the right questions? Are we getting together in focus groups and sort of digging deeper? Because we know that quite often the sort of presenting problems are never the real problems, and it takes courage, and it takes, I think, that desire to want to do things better so that we can make a better environment for all of the gains that you said.
Yeah.
Go on.
I was gonna sort of make reference to the role of the leader and the manager in that, and that this also goes back to the point you made about authenticity, and I think that there's still, after so many years, such a sort of a fear of being honest about your own place, where you are feeling, where you are turning up right now, and that's that real sense of being vulnerable. It sometimes is just so hard for leaders, because they want to be right and they want to be doing a good job, and they that sense of really, am I going to admit that I don't know the answer, is still so prevalent. And in some ways it's a shame, because we know that, as Brené Brown says, vulnerability is the heart of creativity. You are becoming much more of a creative organization if you can demonstrate vulnerability. And then you need to create a culture of psychological safety so that you can be vulnerable and honest and authentic, and all of those very important facets to great leadership.
I totally agree with you. And fear is a very powerful emotion. It's one of the most powerful emotions, because it's part of the survival response, isn't it? And certainly working as a coach, and a lot of the management mental health training that we do, it's very much about, it's not and this is what I mean by it's never the presenting problem. It's not the fear of being authentic. It's the deeper fears, the ego, because the ego can only ever survive from a place of insecurity. That's where it kind of gets fed. And so that fear of what people think will happen when they drop the mask. And what I love seeing is when we see leaders, particularly CEOs, drop the mask, the impact that can have. I always remember one organisation, big oil and gas organisation in Edinburgh, and the CEO was very open about his experience with anxiety and stress. He'd had to take several months out of the organisation, and they didn't have a wellbeing strategy at the time, but helping them to put one together. And he actually created a video, and he's like, look at the video. And it was him just saying, these are my experiences. And what was wonderful was to see the domino impact that had, because he had people sometimes a little bit, kind of quietly, not necessarily coming up saying, yes, this is me too, but saying, I felt a bit like that as well. And it just created such a sense of connection and such a shift in their culture, because he was quite aware that they'd unwittingly created a bit of a toxic boys culture. And just in that one act of courage and bravery, the impact that it had was really quite phenomenal. And it doesn't have to take lots of things to create these shifts, does it?
I love that story. It is wonderful, and it is pretty brave as well, because you're fessing up to vulnerabilities that that aren't connected with most people's perception of a leader, of a strong CEO. And I hats off. It's people like that can change and shift our whole societal culture and perception of what it means to be a leader. And it's interesting, some of the sort of the obstacles or hurdles that I come across when I'm working with executive teams is they're quite clear about the fact that the tactics that they've used in their leadership careers have worked for them, because they are at a point in their careers where they're at the top of the tree. And it's interesting to sort of re-engineer their thinking that actually they might have served you, but they might not continue to serve you. And there might be an even better way to show up that would get even better results. But I think that's a really interesting subject to sort of unpick, how leaders become that intransigent to thinking about alternative ways of leading or managing or showing up. Because, well, what would I have? Who would I be? And this has served me so well in my career, because look at me, look where I am. Why would I want to change that?
Yeah.
But actually, they need to change it because the world around them is changing. There is a war on talent, and the wellbeing economy is going to become an absolute red thread that runs through the success of an organization. And funders and financiers are asking for evidence of the impact that they're having on ESGs, environmental, social, and governance quotas. Those are vital components to a business's success going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved what you said about that whole getting them to, well, the word that came to my mind is that self-awareness, getting them to be aware of their leadership style and the impact that has, the signs, the signals that it sends out. And they can absolutely be forgiven for thinking, well, having maybe quite a dictatorial, very direct management styles got me to where I am, because look, I'm at the top of the tree. But as you said right at the beginning, Bonnie, that what organizations, well, what people are now looking for is very different, and particularly where we've got such high cases that continue to rise around mental health, then what are the kind of leaders that people want to follow?
Yeah, absolutely.
And helping leaders, because it takes, again, it's that whole kind of, if we think about, there's a wonderful quote from Brené Brown that we are, I'm sure you've heard of, the most addicted, obese, medicated, and in debt adult cohort that we've ever had. And if we think about addiction, addiction doesn't always have to mean drug and alcohol, for example. It can mean workaholics.
Yeah.
Where they're just constantly distracting themselves. And people that feel the need to be busy all the time, well, that's a trauma-based response. And so, again, we can forgive leaders that maybe just, they're a bit scared of, well, what happens when I look under the bonnet?
Yeah.
Working with people, like you and I, that can help to create those shifts so that they can be the true selves, not the behaviors that are very ego-led. I don't mean ego as in like egotistical, but how the ego, everything comes down to fear and insecurity with the ego.
Yeah, I'm interested in your views on this. I've worked with quite a few leaders that are really interested in engaging in a sort of a well-being strategy and putting things in place that connect their people, their ESGs, and their business strategy. But it's not for them; it's for their people, and they sort of disassociate from taking personal accountability to change. And I found that quite curious. I'm wondering what you've discovered or your experience of that is as well.
Yeah, great question, Bonnie. And I've experienced both. And there are organizations, I mean, if I take management mental health as a really good example, the organizations where the chief exec has been involved from the outset in what does a program actually need to look like? What's going to let you know that that program has been a success, a worthwhile investment of your time, of your energy, of your money, and they've been part of that. That's not a sort of separate HR discussion and that they've been presented with, oh, right, okay, we're doing this program. So getting the chief exec or the managing director, or often in the US, it's called the president, getting them absolutely engaged and involved right from the start, where they've shown up to each module and they've fully participated, and quite often where they've also engaged in leadership coaching. So it's not just management mental health training, but maybe there's been some leadership coaching around that, has had a far, far bigger success than some organizations where, you know, I think Tesla, for example, you know, Tesla, we're doing some work with Tesla around management mental health training. Am I going to get to talk to Elon Musk? I don't know. I mean, he's not been involved in the decision-making process. So I would caveat this with the, you know, the size of the organization. But I do hear what you say, where it's kind of, there was one organization I remember us working with in the US where that question was, well, what about the C-suite? Oh, no, they don't need it. And the thought that sort of went through my mind was that, have they got bulletproof health? Do they know how to manage their team? And it really sends out, it goes so much into everything that we've talked about. It really sends out a message, and a kind of very unconscious, unspoken message that, you know what, we're elite. We're different. We're not all the same. We're not this one interconnected organism, which is what I see in organisation now. They've kind of separated themselves.
Yeah.
And even though
I building on that, sorry, building on that, you're totally right. And it's as though, you know, we're fixed and we're going to fix you because you're the problem, we're not. And I think that causes some real, you know, there's disingenuous disconnection, and that's when there's a schism between, you know, the true purpose and living the values of an organization. Your points are really, really well made.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's noticed. You know, there was one organization that we worked with years and years and years ago, which we trained about 100 of their managers back in the days of face-to-face training. So it was, you know, flights to Manchester, flights to Ireland, flights to London. And it was really noticed, you know, where are the senior leadership team? And yeah, it's felt. And going back to what you were saying about creating a well-being economy within an organization where everything is practiced at a holistic level. I mean, I don't know what you would get with Virgin, but I would imagine, I don't think that Richard Branson necessarily got the capacity to rock up to every training event, given that I think he owns about 60 organizations. But I love Richard Branson. I've had the blessing of having met him, drank cocktails with him on a rooftop terrace in Shanghai, a moment I will never forget. And what really struck me about him is we were chatting and he said, can I ask your opinion about something? Well, I nearly fell off the rooftop because I was like, oh my gosh, Richard Branson wants my opinion. And it was just such a powerful moment because, and I think that's absolutely his genius, is he asks people questions.
And do you know what? That's such an easy thing for people to do in positions of authority and power and leadership, and even asking your colleagues. We don't have there's no exclusivity to having the right answer. Nobody has the right answer on their own. We need to collaborate our thinking, and that's where I think that businesses can play such an important part on perhaps adopting and understanding the practices and the principles of building a wellbeing economy, because if they don't, which includes people at the heart of everything they do, then they'll be left behind. Yeah. And there is a metamorphosis of businesses and organizations that we are right at the cusp of, and we need to help people in organizations in positions of leadership really understand how they can work with this economic metamorphosis so that they are relevant and still in business in 10 years' time.
Absolutely, 100%. Well, that feels like a wonderful place to leave it, Bonnie. Thank you so much. I could absolutely continue this conversation with you. I think we've probably got about 5 different podcasts from some of the things that we've talked about that we could go on to talk about. But thank you so much for your contribution. I'm sure that anybody that's tuning in has heard some things that really resonate and are food for thought for them. So, yes. And to all of our listeners, thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to joining you very soon. Bye-bye for now.